My name is Tony Belcourt. I've been blessed with two, given two names, traditional names, Wakpaiwitzkai, which means wolf walker, by a Blackfoot elder, Rufus Good Striker, and the other Makwa Kinikinich, which means the bear that leads, given to me by former Ontario Regional Chief Charles Fox. I'm very happy and pleased to have been invited by Kairos to come participate in this important event. You'll have to permit me, or I'm asking for your permission, or not permission, but your what's the word I'm looking for? I got fired up this morning, and if I'm a little fired up about some things, it's because I'm always, it seems, dealing with these kinds of things day in and day out. And at times it's very hard for me to want to be calm and talk about reconciliation and saying, hey, pal, slow down, we need to have a good talk, you know. I posted on my Facebook page, I'm really quite active on Facebook and Twitter. I posted on my Facebook page the links to the presentations by Justin Trudeau and Thomas Mulcair, their interviews on APTN. They're outstanding interviews, and for these two leaders to take time out of their busy election campaign to go in a studio and spend 45 minutes under the clean lights, as well as prepare for it and all the rest that goes into it, that to me means a great deal about their sincerity. Unfortunately, the leader of the other party refused to participate. So I posted these on my Facebook page, and I got comments from someone who's I've always thought of as a friend. I play golf with at the Mississippi Golf Club just outside of Carleton Place. And he was talking about stories of misspending and Attawapiskat, and he said this money is going to the wrong places, doesn't help our cause. There are some bad fish, Tony, who spoil the party for everyone. Now, I suppose there are no bad fish among non-Aboriginal society. It's too bad that they spoil the party for everyone else. He also posted another article by someone named Jessica Klein. And she wrote that relations between First Nations and the Crown have been thorny issues ever since Europeans first colonized this land. There you go. That's the start. And one redeeming quality of the British policy towards natives is it was widely claimed, was that it chose to deal with them as nations rather than conquered people. Good point. But the treaties that came out of these negotiations were short-sighted measures designed to appease geographically diverse tribes of hunter-gatherers by promising payments and land in exchange for non-interference in the Crown's colonialization plans. And this shit goes on for this 4 pages of diatribe. It's all on I left it there on my Facebook page for everyone to read. She talks about the massive problem that's taken shape in communities such as Attawapiskat. Again, she's talking about all of all of us bad fish. And then an ironic twist of their policies was to force us into a life of economic dependency by giving Aboriginal peoples, some Aboriginal peoples, these treaties. And by the Métis too, by the way, and I'll come to that. And talks about whether or not the country can sustain this growing group of people and how much is being spent, the $8.5 billion and all that. No reference, of course, that how much is spent on education and schools and hospitals and roads and everything else in non-Aboriginal society. I won't bother going to read very much more about this, but the government should try to avoid creating new treaties that divide Canadians along racial lines and create generations of people who are dependent on government handouts. Instead, the federal government should work toward reforming the Indian Act to give Aboriginals more private property rights and greater control over their natural resources so they can create prosperous, sustainable communities that are able to lift residents out of poverty and help drive the Canadian economy. In other words, we just got to make sure we have unfettered access to those resources. This kind of colonialism, paternalism, and racism is rampant in the country. And it's not just with the Conservative Party or people who support it. It's everywhere in the country. I bump up against it all the time. What is racism? It's learned behavior. Some of us learn it from our parents against others, and others have learned it against us. What have the Métis people, or what have the Canadian society, and First Nations too, or Inuit as well, if they want to read this kind of stuff, what have they taught about the Métis people? Rebellion. That's the only thing you're going to find in chapters of history. And so I looked up rebellion in the dictionary. Open, organized, and armed resistance to one's government or ruler. Resistance to a defiance of any authority, control, or tradition. Well, in 1869, believe it or not all of Rupert's Land belonged to Canada. And believe it or not, the Hudson's Bay Company couldn't get away with selling it to Canada for $1 million and assume that that was all going to be just A-okay. And when Sir John A. Macdonald sent surveyors out to the Northwest, Red River area, Manitoba, in 1869, before the deal had been concluded, Louis Riel stepped on the chain and he said, "You go no further. Why are you here?" The Métis people had their own government. First Nations people had their own governments. Who are these people coming here? And he was right. British Parliament said so to Sir John A. Macdonald. You can't send troops out there. You have no right. There's something called the Royal Proclamation of 1763. If you're going to encroach on Aboriginal territory, you have to have their consent. There was nothing sought of the Métis, who were about 10,000 at the time in the little area of Red River around Winnipeg. That 70-mile stretch from, or 100-kilometer mile stretch from the Canada-US border up to Lake Winnipeg. Most of them predominantly speak French-speaking, as well as their own Aboriginal language, primarily Soto. Had their own language called Michif, which we call Michif. So Sir John A. was forced to send out forced to enter into negotiations with Riel's provisional government. Riel's government had issued a list of rights for the entry of that territory into Canada. Among the list of rights was that since the Métis considered this to be their treaty, they demanded as part of the list of rights that treaties be entered into with the full-bloods. And ever since then, we've had treaty number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and treaty 11. More treaties to come that are being negotiated in unceded territory elsewhere, primarily in British Columbia. Riel's provisional government also was thinking about the governance needs of the people that would be in the territory in the future. Thinking about the minority, a small number of English speakers that were among them. And they said, we want a government here that will be for this territory. Will have its own legislature. Will elect representatives that will be representative of all of the people. And that one of the rights of these people will be that there will be bilingualism within the government and the judiciary, so that the English speakers could be treated fairly. Lands were to be set aside for the Métis who lived there, that their lands would be, the lands that they occupied would be recognized as their lands. And that there would be a further 1.2 million acres set aside for the children of those families. That's a large amount of territory within the small little postage-sized stamp of the province of Manitoba that was to be created as a result of this treaty. That little postage-sized stamp going from the Ontario border, basically over to Brandon, Manitoba, and north to Lake Winnipeg. Sections 31 or Sections 31 and 32 of the Manitoba Act, which became part of Canada's Constitution, were to set aside these lands. So what happened? The agreement was reached, and on July the 1st, 1870, all of Rupert's Land was entered into Canadian Confederation. All of the waters that drain into the Hudson's Bay and James Bay. All of northern Quebec, all of northern Ontario, and all of the lands west to the Great Divide and the Rocky Mountains. Very soon after the agreement had been reached, the area was flooded with settlers from Ontario. Métis people had gone off on the buffalo hunt, as they always did, only to come back to find their houses occupied, taken over by people with guns who said, to heck with you, there's more of us than you. Many of the people were forced to leave. Some moved to Saskatchewan, others moved further south. Remember that medicine line wasn't there before. There was no such thing as a Canada-US border. All of that territory was open territory. North Dakota, Montana, and further west. People moved down there. They already had communities down there anyway. A lot of people, as we know, ended up in Saskatchewan, in communities on the South Saskatchewan River, and in one of the most famous places known, Batoche, where again there was another rebellion in 1885 because the people there were facing the same problems they were facing before. People were coming into their territory unannounced, wanting to take over their territory. They thought they would be able to do another deal the way that had been done in 1870, 15 years before. What they didn't account on was by that time, Sir John A. had General Middleton and the Gatling gun. The first time in the world that the machine gun was used on anyone. Finally, our people who were defending their communities, their families, and their homes, reduced to rusty nails as ammunition, were defeated. Riel gave himself up, went to a rigged trial in Regina, where there was no 12 justices. There were 6. There weren't any that were French-speaking. They were all English. There weren't any that were Catholic. They were all Protestant. Rigged from the beginning was the charge of high treason. The government had to go to great lengths, a lot of research, to come up with the charge against Louis Riel, who was also, by the way, an American citizen by that time. He was found guilty and hanged in 1885. The only Canadian ever hanged for high treason in this country. One of the things often not known is that there were 9 First Nations people that were hanged with Louis Riel that day too, because of their joining in the fight. First Nations, Poundmaker, Big Bear, reservations that people had been forced to live on were in starvation, and they joined Riel's forces. A lot of the history I'm talking about, you're not going to find in school books. I don't know how many of you have heard that. How many of you, put up your hand, that have read this or been taught this in your school curriculum during history? Yeah, you would have heard about the rebellion. There's no question about that. We're still finding a lot about the attitudes that permeated then of the government that are still existing today, unfortunately. In 1993, one of our people in Sault Ste. Marie, his name was Steve Powley, and his son Roddy, went to hunting, as they always did, every winter, every fall, to get food that they needed for the family. Theirs is a mixed economy. In Roddy's case was because the poor man, that dear man passed away soon after the decision in the Supreme Court in 2003. He went hunting with his son. They decided they weren't going to hide their meat anymore. They paraded it in front of the M&R, and they were charged for illegal hunting. And rather than pleading guilty, which is what a lot of our people used to do, and pay a fine, he said, "I'm not pleading guilty. This is my right. And he went to court to fight for that. In 2003, when the court, by the way, we won the court case at every level, the trial, Superior Court of Appeal, the Ontario Court of Appeal, and finally at the Supreme Court of Canada, where all 9 judges sat and unanimously gave a judgment in favor. What did we see when we were in court? All of those courts, and including at the Supreme Court of Canada, where there were lawyers representing the Government of Canada, all 10 provincial governments, and the 2 northern governments, all on one side. What was the position at trial? First of all, there are no Métis in Sault Ste. Marie. There never were. That's the Government of Ontario's position. And if the Crown finds that there were Métis in Sault Ste. Marie, well, they don't exist. And if they find that there are Métis there, well, they're not the same Métis as the ones that might have lived at a time when the rights might have existed. And if, first of all, the Métis never had any rights, and if the court finds they had rights, then they were extinguished. It's just complete denial of the Métis people in every way. We often talk about cultural genocide in this country, but what kind of genocide is it when a government denies, governments deny the very existence of a people, of an Indigenous people in this country? I recently participated in blanket exercise. First time I've ever done that. How many of you have been at a blanket exercise? Good, that's great. I think it's a fabulous thing that you're doing. I can't say enough about it. There's one thing, however, that I wanted to say is, how many of you noticed when you stood on one of those blankets that there was a blanket set aside for the Métis lands? There wasn't one. There were blankets for the First Nations lands, blankets for the Inuit, none for the Métis. As said, I got fired up this morning, and I guess there's just fire in my belly that just won't die. It goes down a lot because we have made a lot of progress. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission report did not include specifically Métis people, but a lot of what was reported in that report applies to the Métis people as well. And I'm happy to say that of their 94 recommendations, those that are not specific to First Nations because of their unique situation, those recommendations all refer to Aboriginal peoples, which includes, as all of you know, the Indians, the Inuit, and the Métis. A lot of the things that are talked about in the Truth and Reconciliation report about the intergenerational effects, it's not widely known, are the same kinds of effects that are faced by many Métis people. Métis people did go to Indian residential schools. the Métis people were certainly caught up in the 60s scoop. I'm going to close off now because first of all, I've really gone way over my time, but I did want to tell you that my daughter, Christy Belcourt, an artist who talk about somebody who's got fire in her belly. When the Truth and Reconciliation report came out, she created this hashtag. It's called My Reconciliation Includes. And ever since she created that hashtag on March the 29th, right till today, I was astounded. I went on Twitter this morning to I wanted to get some of those early ones because I remember them. I had pages and pages, thousands of comments. My reconciliation includes. It's fabulous, absolutely fabulous. But I did want to read some that she had posted. My reconciliation includes a national inquiry and action and full support and funding for grassroots organizations on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirits. My reconciliation includes a land base for Métis people. My family was screwed with a script system that was purposely designed for land theft. My reconciliation includes an end to the phrase, Canada's Native people, and the understanding we are sovereign nations. My reconciliation includes full financial support on par with official languages for immersion programs to restore Indigenous languages. My reconciliation includes Canadian children to be taught the true history each and every year so we don't have to battle each generation. My reconciliation includes full recognition of sacred sites with protections of those sites and management by Indigenous peoples. My reconciliation includes the suicides of our youth be treated as the national crisis it is. My reconciliation includes a moratorium on child welfare agencies stealing our children and a flood of support for families and communities. My reconciliation includes the right to hunt and fish and harvest without MNR harassment. My reconciliation includes an end to the mean-spirited adversarial position of us against them that Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development and Justice Canada exhibits towards us. Ends up many times in division between Métis and First Nations, primarily. My recognition includes a Canada where families are not told their daughters are runaways and to wait before filing missing persons report. My reconciliation includes media representation that shows us as a people that we are and not the savages Hollywood seems to think we are. My reconciliation includes clean water, clean lands, protections for future generations. My reconciliation includes a different form of government for Canada where Indigenous nations lead and have veto over development. My recognition includes a country where we are not considered outsiders in our own homelands, but not expected to assimilate either. My reconciliation includes Canada's respecting Indigenous rights, not fighting us in courts to delay and deny. My reconciliation includes an end to blaming families or women for their own deaths. My reconciliation includes a country where Indigenous traditional education doesn't take a back seat to Western curriculum. My reconciliation includes a restoration of Indigenous place names. My reconciliation includes the acknowledgement that Canada has a serious problem with internalized and systemic racism. My reconciliation includes getting land of my ancestors back so that I can live there and not be landless as an Indigenous person in my own country. Again, I want to thank you, Ed, for inviting me to come here. I want to thank all of you for bearing with me while I went through my diatribe. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you very much.